Welcome, welcome. Closed captioning is available in today's webinar by selecting the closed caption icon at the lower right corner of your screen. And since this is an automated service, we apologize in advance for any errors in transcription. There will be ASL interpreters. We have two people here today, Patty Bettis Eddy and Rachel Ledick. They will be interpreting on the screen with us throughout the program. And today's session will be recorded and available on the Teach-In website soon. So I'm going to introduce myself. I am Tanya S. Autry, and I am joining you today from the ancestral lands of the Erie and the Haudenosaunee people. So I'm living in the area that is at the moment known as Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a cultural organizer in the arts, and I also work as the gun curator in residence at MoCA Cleveland. And some of you might know me through the Museums Are Not Neutral global initiative that we have that basically highlights the fallacies of neutrality that so many museums put out there. And we're calling for equity-based transformation in museums. So this teach-in, the art of collective care and responsibility, handling images of Black suffering and death, is part of one of my kind of latest liberatory curatorial projects. It's called the Black Liberation Center. And this is an experimental series of exhibitions, workshops, and programming that spotlights art and culture that envision and strategize paths toward the freedom of all Black people, and thus all people. And I really want to stress that this is a Black Liberation Center program. It's an intervention. It's a rupture from the ongoing institutional disregard, the anti-Blackness of museums and of this world, the anti-Blackness of our world in general. This program is in association with MoCA Cleveland and Cincinnati Contemporary Arts Center. Arts of collective care and responsibility, handling images of Black suffering and death, this teaching is for museum professionals, educators, artists, community organizers, artists, activists, writers, marketing professionals, students, and just pretty much anybody. So thinking carefully before distributing images of Black suffering and death is really vital in the fight against anti-Black racism and to create a culture of collective care. So yesterday, we were able to start off this teaching. It was really a powerful and beautiful experience. And I want to really reflect on Miss Samaria Rice. She is the mother of Tamir Rice. And she shared some reflections with us to open our program. And they are haunting to me. And something she said during her remarks is that she said, "I truly believed I was an American citizen and that I would receive justice for the assassination of my son." I truly believed I was an American citizen and that I would receive justice for the assassination of my son. And she highlighted how we are living on the edge, So, as many of you know, Tamir was just 12 years old when he was murdered by Cleveland police on November 22nd, 2014. The 6th anniversary was just 2 weeks ago. So she came in to talk to us when her son had, she's going through a really rough time. Just like last Sunday was the 6th anniversary. She has experienced real trauma. The violence this nation state does to Black mothers is horrendous and it's ongoing. The state violence is it's ongoing, and the rarefied art world, and I'm saying that rarefied art world, right? Because there are different types of art, or worlds of art, but there's a certain type of art world, and it operates as an arm of the state, of hegemony, of capitalism. It also perpetrates anti-Black violence regularly. And this art world has contributed to her pain. And that is atrocious. We really do need a society that is grounded in the radical practice of collective care. and I'm stressing it's a radical practice. We're getting into the roots of issues here. This is not to just throw words onto things and say care, care, care. It is a practice, this orientation that acknowledges that the health and the safety of all persons is grounded in a shared opposition to anti-Black racism, and realizing how central anti-Blackness is in this on this planet. So we would be fighting against that. We would be fighting against gender violence. We would fight against poverty and other forms of oppression. That's what collective care is about, okay? So I'm starting the day off a little heated, and I wanted to make a point because I see that some of the people in the art world don't understand that this is about changing up. This is about a rupture of the existing paradigm. That is a violent paradigm. So today I have my friend and my colleague Kijo Lee here, who's going to be joining me this afternoon and co-moderating this roundtable. Black trauma and death imagery is always spectacle. You know, there are so many claims that these images of Black death as aesthetic works are necessary for raising awareness. And typically, there's not a lot of discussion about who is having that awareness raised for them. Who is that for? Who benefits from this imagery? Spectacle-centered imagery of Black destroyed bodies isn't simply kind of a representation of violence. It is a form of violence. It is a tool of racism. Often this history, the history of anti-Blackness is trivialized. And anti-Blackness is basically, it's historical and it's ongoing. And we're going to talk about that today in many ways. And we're going to think about the questions that remain unaddressed through this uncritical perpetuation of this genre, right? What's the environment? What's the day-to-day life that makes lynching possible? Because it's still going on. That's not in the past. The fact that, you know, like folks like Tamir Rice can be lynched in this country. It's happening all the time. Today we're going to talk about, kind of explore three themes. And this is going to, against this tide of uncritical assertions, some of us who urge critical engagement know about these kind of three areas. So we're going to think about historical roots, lynching violence and imagery. We're going to talk about artistic projects, the individual use. We're going to talk about exhibition, the exhibition market imperative, how images are disseminated in public spaces, the trading and consuming of Black people's bodies. Before we bring on our wonderful, brilliant panelists, we have William C. Anderson, Alexandra Bell, Dr. Kirsten Buick, Dr. Christina Sharpe. Before I bring them on, though, I would like to, introduce Dr. Aimee Meredith Cox. She is going to be guiding us through a meditation to keep us grounded. She is a professor at Yale University, and she also is a dancer and a yogi. So she's going to bring us on to help us remain grounded. I'd like to welcome Aimee Meredith Cox.
Thank you so much, LaTanya. And I'm so grateful to be able to be back with you this afternoon. And I was thinking about yesterday's program, the beginning of yesterday, and I as well was really struck by Ms. Rice's words. They stayed with me all day. And so I was thinking about our meditation today, and I'd like to guide us through an empathy meditation. It'll be a brief meditation, but an empathy meditation. And this empathy meditation is an empathy meditation for ourselves. So we have to start here. So just right here in your seat, I'd like to ask you to shift in your seat in such a way that you can really feel your feet on the ground. So that might mean that you have to kind of sit a little more forward on your seat and let your feet ground. If you're barefoot, spread your toes. If your feet are in shoes, can you even still spread your toes and almost feel the ground through your shoes? And then feel your bum connecting to your seat as another, like, rooting. The feet are rooting, the seat is rooting, and then allow your spine to be kind of long and free. And then relax your face. Right? What does that mean? Relax the muscles in your face. See if you can relax the tension around your brow, kind of unhinge the jaw. You might even move your face around a little bit. Let the tongue fall away from the roof of your mouth and feel a softness come into your entire face. And with this softness, allow your eyes to get heavy, your eyelids to get heavy. And so you might completely close the eyes down, or you might just sort of glance down to the tip of your nose or lower your gaze. But allow this kind of shutting down of the gaze bring you into yourself. So we often close the eyes in meditation so that we can bring ourselves closer to our interior. And so we can feel from the inside out. And so allow yourself to just be here right now, just as you are, feeling the breath moving through your body. And so without needing to do anything fancy to the breath, you don't have to extend it, you don't have to hold it, you don't have to change it, just feel it. Just feel its pathway through the body. Feel it expanding to each cell in the body. Feeling this breath, this life force, traveling through you, this container of ourselves. And then feeling the breath here, noticing the temperature as you breathe in, maybe a little coolness through the nostrils as you inhale. Maybe the air a little bit warmer on the way out on the exhale as it passes through those same nostrils. And just paying close attention to yourself here, paying close attention to what you're feeling, and using the breath to feel a little deeper, coming a little bit closer to yourself. And then here, rooted through the feet, rooted through the seat, relax through the face and attending to your breath. I'm going to ask us to visualize ourselves just as we are, seated directly across from ourselves. So see your mirror self wearing the same clothes in the same chair with the same facial expression. See yourself in your mind's eye, seated right directly across from you. And take that self in. See yourself fully. Breathe yourself in on each inhale. Send that life force back out from your embodied self to your mirror self on each exhale. And as you not only feel yourself in this body, regard yourself, see your mirror self right across from you, and send that self whatever you need. On your breath, send that self protection, send that self-care, send that self-groundedness, send that self-love. Whatever you need, send it to yourself. And allow your breath to be the vehicle, breathing from this body, sending exactly what you need across to that self that you see right in your mind's eye. The embodied self, breathing with the same joys and struggles and frustrations and love as the mirror self. And as you're breathing here, let the breath bring the mirror self closer and closer and closer to your embodied self, so there is no distance. And so these feelings, these wishes of love and protection and safety and joy and groundedness that you were sending to your mirrored self, feel it now in the space of your own body. Inhaling what you need, filling up on all that nourishes, all that fortifies. And use your exhale to send that through your entire body, from the crown of your head down to your feet, connecting to the earth. Breathing in, intentionally taking what you need, what gives life, what gives stability, what allows joy. Feel that in your body, feel all of it. And then as you exhale, let it flow through your body. And so just take a few more breaths on your own here. I'll go quiet for just a little bit to allow ourselves to feel within ourselves this beautiful process of self-empathy, seeing ourselves clearly and holding ourselves with love. Keep breathing fully. Keep allowing yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling, letting it rise up and flow through your body on the breath. And just take one hand and place that open palm right across your chest on your heart. You might move it around a little bit so you could really feel the heart beating into your hand. And then take your other hand and just cover that hand and just give a little pressure, both hands kind of pressing in, maybe even circling around the heart, massaging your heart space, breathing into the rhythm of your heartbeat. And just take a few more long breaths here, sending yourself what you need, holding yourself with care. And as we move through the rest of this day and the days to come, knowing that we can always give ourselves what we need, we can always pause and listen through the breath to what we're asking for, what we're yearning for, and give that to ourselves. Let your eyes open. Let your hands fall away from your body. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that beautiful meditation, which I think we all needed at this moment. And I'm Kijo Lee. I am a scholar and educator, currently the Assistant Director of Academic Affairs at the Cleveland Museum of Art and co-moderator of this series of teach-ins with Tanya Autry. Introducing you to our panelists today. And I'm going to start with Dr. Christina Sharpe, who is a writer and professor of humanities at York University. Christina is the author of 2 books, In the Wake on Blackness and Being and Monstrous Intimacies, Making Post-Slavery Subjects. She is currently working on 2 monographs, Ordinary Notes, which will be published in 2022, and Black Still Life. We also have Alexandra Bell. They are a multidisciplinary artist who investigates the complexities of narrative, information, consumption, and perception, utilizing various media. Alex deconstructs language and imagery to explore the tension between marginal experiences and dominant histories. Currently, Alex is a 2020 Pioneer Works resident. Next, we have William Anderson, a writer and activist from Birmingham, Alabama. William's work has appeared in various media outlets, and he is co-author of the book As Black as Resistance from 2018. His writings have also been included in multiple anthologies. He has a forthcoming book, The Nation on No Map, that will come out in 2021. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Kirsten Buick, who has published extensively on African-American art and been the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships. Kirsten has taught at the University of New Mexico since 2001. Her first book is entitled Child of Fire, Mary Edmonia Lewis and the Problem of Art History's Black and Indian Subject. And her second book, In Authenticity, Kara Walker and the Eidetics of Racism is in progress. So I want to welcome all of our panelists, as well as welcoming back LaTanya. And I want to open up with thinking about LaTanya's opening remarks. And in order to stage this sort of rupture, I think we first have to understand the representational weight of lynching imagery historically. So I'm wondering if, William, if you would start us off by talking about how you might describe that weight as you understand it.
Yeah, sure. I want to first say thanks for the introduction, and I want to give honor to Ms. Rice and all of the words that she offered yesterday, which were very, very impactful on everything I'm going to say. But yeah, so my introduction to this topic really comes from my family heritage and my personal relation to this topic. I grew up in a Southern household, and the imagery of lynching was something that was always kind of in close proximity and was present. So I began to think more about this as viral imagery of Black killings at the hands of police became more prevalent, particularly with the killing of Mike Brown. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is how Ida B. Wells talks about lynching and lynch law in America as a sort of unwritten law that was used in state and settler expansion in the West. And it's interesting to think about how foundational displaying dead and oppressed people's bodies has been to the US project. And from the earliest genocidal moments at Fort Plymouth to slave revolts, this nation has a history of white violence utilizing the visuals of people's bodies as warning signs and as celebratory spectacles. White people have always used public displays of brutality and violence as a part of development and maintaining the white supremacist project, you know, from lynching postcards to the killings now. You know, as recently, I wrote an essay about this in 2015 after Mike Brown was killed. And as recently as 2014, there was a story about a white man in Tennessee who threatened a medical official who threatened Black people who were filing a complaint against emergency responders by telling them he owned a piece of a Black man's body from a lynching that had been passed down to him since 1896. And so this is something that's not, you know, too far removed. And so we can't assume that our promotion and that our dissemination of brutality, death, and killing in the society is always inherently separate from that just because of our identity, or because of our intention. And so to another end, you know, liberalism uses these images as like a sign of progress, something to look back on in the past that we say like, this is something that used to happen, it doesn't happen anymore, but obviously that's not the case. And so when we start to think about this further, you know, how this has been used as a place to, you know, mark progress for some people or to celebrate and this egregious violence, we have to be considerate of what death and brutality and traumatic visuals mean in a larger context to the state and to the society as a whole, this white supremacist society.
Thank you. I think thinking about things as foundational, that circulation as an always already existing subtext, right, for everything that we might be trying to build on top of it by either creating, showing, re-demonstrating those images. And I wonder, Christina, if you would speak to the sort of foundational nature of this imagery and the sort of problematics that you see around.
Sure. I'm going to start by sort of acknowledging where the space that I'm speaking from. And so I'm going to say that I'm joining you from Toronto. And I want to begin with an acknowledgement of the violent histories of where we are and an acknowledgement of the ongoing conflicts and contradictions of this land, air, and water. That this land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And that the meeting place of Toronto remains the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and our intersecting communities are comprised of those native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as to Tiffany Latabo King's formation, white conquistador settlers, and those people who've come here by force or otherwise as a result of slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and ongoing wars. These Americas are built on violence and erasure, and we bring these histories with us when we enter any room, and we must bring them into view. With this knowledge of history, we enter here in the hopes of making a different world. And I begin with that to say that, you know, these histories of lynching are also present in this space. These histories of terror are present, you know, outside of the United States, in the context of North America, South America, and really everywhere where white supremacy and anti-Blackness have spread and taken root, where these genocidal logics have taken root. So to speak along with William, with that really, you know, wonderful grounding opening, you know, I think that everything tells us, everything shows us that the repetition of these images do not produce the kind of response that we imagine and desire that they will. That if they did, the murders would have ended. But they do produce a kind of re-wounding and re-traumatizing of, I think, Black and Blackened people who are forced to encounter these images. And as LaTanya said in her opening, that they're not just images to re-encounter the violence again and again. So for instance, on social media, the only social media that I'm really on is Twitter. And a long time ago, I learned to turn off autoplay of videos because I saw the murder of Laquan McDonald, and I will never forget that. And, you know, unbidden, that murder replays in my mind sometimes. And that is also, it seems to me, part of the function of the state violence, to keep, to both reproduce it in the world, but also the kind of disciplining logic of reproducing it. You know, we know, you know, Saidiya Hartman has told us, Frank Wilderson has told us, many other people have told us, Toni Morrison, Dionne Brand, many other people have told us that the repetition of violence does not produce empathy, it produces more violence.
Thank you for that, Christina. And so I would like to invite Alex, if you would like to also talk about sort of your position to this imagery with your work as well.
I not to go too far off, but I really am interested in the way the newspapers talk about lynching, even in the absence of imagery. I saw the Howard Pendel's new video work. It's 16 minutes. It features a series of violent lynchings and this hypnotic tick-tocking back and forth. And she's trying to, I think, make a connection between early lynchings and kind of modern day extrajudicial murders of police. It's pretty graphic. I was only able to view it once, but there's a gap of images. There's black, and when there's no images, there's this kind of really violent autopsy-like description of death. And what I found to be interesting in that moment was that language, even in the absence of images, forces a type of visualization. And so without having something to look at, I was actually, in this really morbid way, doing extra work of thinking, of imagining what death was like. So part of what I think about with lynching really is that even in early white Southern press and their role in lynching, even without images, there is usually the same kind of graphic, repetitious language. And so the introduction of Blacks into the narrative of America is often dehumanizing and associated with death and criminality. And so I say that because I want to return to that at some other point, but that's how I think of lynching in this moment. I think about the language attached to I think about newspapers using terms as brute or fiend, or the promotion of lynchings as events, celebrated events.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, and for orienting us in this present moment and thinking about the sort of intertextuality of these images. And then Kirsten, if you would also give us that same sort of orientation, how you think about these or enter into these images.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for having me. I'd like to also honor the words of Miss Miria Rice and the ancestral experiences of William and all of our ancestral experiences in this country. I'd also like to say that I speak from the traditional homelands of the Pueblos of Sandia. And I am in New Mexico right now, where the Pueblo Diné and Apache people have been since time immemorial. In terms of lynching, my interest stems in the fact that white is not a given, that whiteness is not a given, and that lynching is a form of community formation. It is a necessary process in white racial formation. If you look at the roles of who attended lynchings, because often those were published in newspapers, it looks like a ship's manifest from Ellis Island. These people were only provisionally white, and the crises in whiteness are often, and capitalism are often played out through the torture of Black people. I'm also cautious about using academic speak when considering lynching. I don't allow my students to use terms like Black bodies or brown bodies. I think those terms initially allowed us to kind of shock ourselves into what happened to the victims of lynchings, but ultimately it continues the dehumanizing strategies of lynching. Concomitantly, I don't allow them to use the term dehumanization without unpacking it, because I believe that part of the process of the torture was knowing that you were doing it to other human beings. And so the language of dehumanization actually exempts the people who use that language from any possibility of being part of the process. And so it others both the victims and the perpetrators. There's something in us that can't embrace the horror of knowing that human beings knowingly do this to other human beings. And that's part of the pleasure, and it's part of the process. And it's part of the process of violent white racial formation. So one more thing. And so what I ask my students is that my white students, I want them to understand that their whiteness is provisional and that they have a choice on how to perform that whiteness.
Could I say something else? I think that's really interesting that you said that the names read like the ship's manifest from Ellis Island, and it just made me think of an article by Patricia J. Williams, the ethnic scarring of American whiteness. The lynching as that gesture to consolidate your movement into the possessive investment in whiteness, into the possession of whiteness. It also made me think of that moment in Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, where the ex-colored man, is unwilling witness to the lynching, and it is that which cements his exit from speaking and identifying as Black.
Thank you. to all of you, like these reflections, I'm just like deep in it. I'm trying to take notes, but then I'm stopping to think with you. You know, what you're bringing up, all of these important points that, and some of it I'm like, I'm learning, you know, I'm constantly learning, like stuff that I thought 5 years ago. I'm just like, I'm embarrassed to say that I've thought it. And I keep thinking, keep growing even from last year and so forth. But, you know, part of what I hear so much in the art world and working in these museums is this, it's almost like this rhetoric of both sides, you know, that we unfortunately have encountered a lot of that for the last several years or a few years or so. But we have to have both sides. Just your opinion, LaTanya. I've seriously been told this, right? When talking about the anti-Blackness in the museums and how representations are used in place of actually countering anti-Blackness. It's like, well, we're going to put some artwork of some by a Black artist or so forth, and now we're done. And yeah, and I feel like there's this exercise of, well, we're doing both sides. We need to put those images in here because we're going to exhibit that side of this narrative. And what that makes me think of is like those words from Saidiya Hartman, that expression she uses, the brutal asymmetry of power.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because I have found myself often just using this expression about like, we need to pay attention to power relations. That's what I've been saying. And I mean, I just said that like earlier this year in summer or something. And then I came back to reading her Scenes of Subjection, you know, I think it's chapter 2. And she says how, you know, even just talking about power in that way, using this expression like it's about, well, these people have more power than this. But she goes, really, that's not accurate. And she goes back to talk about Foucault, which I haven't read the passage that she's referring to, but there was this thing that she starts saying that we really need to think about the brutal asymmetry, you know, like of what has happened with what slavery has done. It is not just like, well, these people have power and these ones don't, or they have a little bit more than you, and so forth. And I feel like, so in the institution, that kind of response of like, well, we need to have this side of the story, that is about that choice that they're making, which I thank you, Kirsten, for really stressing that, and about like how you do not allow your students to use that language, that word of dehumanization. That's the kind of stuff, like hearing you talk about that, that's actually pushing me, because it's something I've been reared on, you know, and I wasn't thinking critically about what that actually for forever. And it was really when I started reading and hearing you talk about that, I was like, whoa, okay, just in this year, I have grown a lot more, and I'm embarrassed to say, but that's also part of this discussion today, what we're talking about. And I hope we're going to get into this a little bit more when we move on to our next theme. And I want to invite all of you to just jump in and see where you want. You don't have to, we don't have to do this as formal as we've been doing. This is a convening, I hope, a convening of, you know, really brilliant, good souls. And I want y'all to just be in here and do your thing. So, you know, do this like we are talking to one another in our home. Well, we are in our homes, right? We are in our home.
At a table, or
You know,
And I would also, please, Alex, please.
Okay. I was going to say that I think the coverage of Michael Brown's murder is akin to a lynching image. A lot of the papers ran his body lying in the street for hours. That was a kind of central image to kind of presenting that story. And so in that sense, newspapers were complicit in this type of circumstance. Imagery. The work that I did, A Teenager with Promise, tries to wrestle a bit with this kind of both sides thinking, right? The day of Michael Brown's funeral, August 25th, 2014, the New York Times ran adjacent stories of Officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. They were side by side in the center of the paper. And there was a particular kind of equalness about that really kind of bothered me. It was as if no one in the staff could wrestle with this idea that we have a cop, an agent of state, and we have this so some of what the work tries to do is like reclaim a bit of space and point to that type of this false sense of objectivity, right? This kind of idea that we can kind of step back and do something very coolly. But I want to kind of toss that in there for us to think about news's role in this and asymmetry. So I think that'll be a good connecting point for where museums come in, the use of art as moving on from discussion of lynchings.
If I could just say one little thing, also the newspaper's roles in producing lynchings, the history of newspapers' roles in producing that violence, both historical and present. Which is why your redaction and annotation work is so important in terms of drawing our attention to the role that journalism plays in perpetuating violence.
I hope it's all right. I'd like to read one of the comments from our chat, which I think connects to the conversation quite well, from Taylor Aldridge. There's a currency that is generated through the dispossession of Black subjects in visual art that directly benefits whiteness within museums, curators, artists, and directors who wish to usurp Black people's likeness. And then a thank you. So there's so they are thanking LaTanya and the panel for drawing out the entanglement between anti-Blackness and present-day museums, which insist that they are neutral in the racial project when they are indeed not. And I mean, I think this ties really closely to what you started with, William, in thinking about the impossibility of utilizing racist material to undo racist circumstances, which is, I think, the sort of waters we're swimming in here. How could we possibly produce that effect when we are using the very material,
the expectation that the repetition of the brutalized to death body of a Black person can produce anything other than brutalization and violence in its recirculation, that the insistence that Black suffering be a pedagogical and didactic tool is quite something. And I think even in memorials and museums whose explicit project is said to be counter to that, it still occurs.
Yeah, and also you can't simply decide because you want to create art or because you want to show someone an image that it's completely detextualized in relation to the larger society in which you're doing it.
Yeah.
So, that's to say this imagery that we're talking about, it's always being displayed within a racist society. It's always being displayed within a white supremacist society. So this sort of individualistic thinking that is directly connected to countless forms of anti-Black violence, where people feel ownership over the bodies of others in life and in death. The fact of the matter is, we should afford people the respect in life and in death, and not decide what we feel is best for their body simply because we feel like it. Everyone has lives, politics, desires, hopes, dreams that predate their encounter with a violent act. And so if someone, chooses to place a purpose on someone else's life or their body after they're deceased, that's completely unfair to that person because you don't know if they would have wanted you to do that.
You know, here is where I feel like it gets complicated in a way in terms of some people are using those images, right? I'm not talking about aestheticized versions, but certain photographic images and how they're being used to mobilize, you know, people. People are, you know, people got up in the streets like what we saw this summer, a global uprising really happening, and thinking, you know, more, it's different, but thinking about what Miss Mamie Mobley Till did. I think I might have messed up her name. Is it Miss Mamie Till Mobley, right? Yeah, so the fact that she wanted pictures of her son's body, her son Emmett Till, to be in, but you know, again, it's going, I know y'all know this, but I'm just gonna say it. Who she was allowing to take those pictures and where those pictures were circulated in a Black press magazine, right? So there was a certain closeness, there's a certain contextualization in there. So a lot of times people, and those pictures were in jet, and then the people came to view the body to be part of that visual were mainly of a Black community in Chicago, the people who lined up for hours and hours to come experience that. But there is a proximity, you know, there is also a shared vulnerability with those people. And so what that meant, but then something different happens in these other spaces. And a lot of times, all of these textures, right, the textures of these relationships get lost in the equation a lot of times, especially in these white museum spaces. There is a disavowal of all of that history, and really no acknowledgement or no awareness of it for real. They don't know, and they don't care. But I think I'm kind of troubled with sometimes within, in particular in certain Black communities, our use of this imagery as well, and what it can do. But I'm thinking very much about photography being shared and what it can do, but also the traumatic aspects. I actually like to talk about that a little bit, because that seems to be in this nuanced zone of like, when is it okay? Is it okay ever? And is it that it's not okay, but that it is necessary in some way? And how so? Like, how can it be done in a way that is in some way?
I think I can wait a little here, because the County Narratives work, which looks for bias, and New York Times reporting started
Thinking maybe Alex's internet has stalled. There it is. Alex, just so you know, your internet stalled for a moment.
Okay. I was saying that the early decision to put that work in public required an awareness of community space. In part, I was engaging in illegal activity, so I had to have an awareness of the police, neighborhood spaces, and so there was a certain awareness and community thinking behind putting that out into the world as I started to maybe kind of use up space and decide to go outside of my way the work was handled. It was torn down easily, quickly. It was written on. There was an understanding. There was a way to work safe. When I had a clearer understanding of the community space and care around the work, it was easier to control a response to it in a way, right? So I wasn't, plastering Michael Brown's face up for additional harm all over the place, right? So there was something that there's a particular kind of care with the way that work was produced and put up. And even as it started to move into museum spaces, there's a lot of work around what is in the space with the work, how is it going to be taken down? But there is, and Latanya, you and I talked about this as well, when we get further along into the counter-narrative series, and I think this is about kind of handling death of other people, and what points are we trying to prove who's the audience, and what are we trading on when we're trying to make a point. The third series, Tulsa Hate Crime, features a murder, and Khalid Jabara, and starting to work on this, I received a note from a cousin who, wanted to understand the work. And at this time, I was very attached to the fact that there isn't a harm in releasing this work because there's no image to correct, right? There's no photographic death. But so I eventually moved forward with this. I did sense or understood that there'd be some discomfort, the family member, and it quickly became problematic to continue to produce outside of me not creating a community with the family member. The issue of it is that I'm actually telling this murder over and over again just so I can make a point about whiteness, right? So I think it was and if you create work that centers the well-being of victims in your community space, the outcome is very different than if there is what it refers to as this kind of individualistic kind of top-down idea of I know what's right and I'm going to do this thing and you're going to understand. It's important for us to understand how we can also carry forth anti-Blackness against other communities, because I imagine that some of my time was that this isn't a child, this isn't, there's no image here. And that way now I understand that there's a physical element to me reproducing this particular kind of harm. In addition, a lot of times when these narratives are out in public, families, particularly of victims of police violence, haven't seen a modicum of justice, So what they have left is control in some ways over that narrative. You would hope that they do, and so artists have to be really responsive about what they take from public space and recreate. So I think that there was, for me there, it reveals kind of like a little thinness in my politics that maybe needed some correcting, but it also means that it's critical for artists to have an understanding of what they're trying to do as well, because part of the decision to move forward, because the institution had kind of decided that counter narratives was a photographic project, right? And so even though this work is making a claim at language, it's almost like, well, there's no photo here, so the same kind of violence isn't being produced, right? But there is, it's one of the reasons that I opened making the comments about violent language, is because that the continuation, I don't show the work anymore. I haven't shown it in maybe a year and a half, but it does reproduce a particular kind of harm. And so I don't think at the time I would have maybe thought about it that way, but I think, as you grow and you understand what represents care, what is care, what is harm, I see a lot of space there for it to be, change in that work.
I think in some ways to get there, we have to undermine fundamentally this clinging to the aura, right? Not just of the museum, but the aura of the artist, right? I found in conversations, I found myself embroiled when the ship's image of Emmett Till emerged. And I thought I said very benignly, what would have been more interesting is if she had painted Carolyn Bryant with all the trappings of innocence that accompanied her whiteness, so that distancing that I think several of you addressed earlier that can happen with this, with the reproduction, right, of this violent imagery, it allowed white viewers to say, oh, weren't they terrible and wasn't that bad and isn't this also beautiful? Rather than, oh, that could be me, that is that proximity. So that there's like an interesting distancing that happens through that reproduction. I
think there's some, there's some clean lines here, right? Some of it's very simple. mess with people's kids, right? Some of it is very obvious, right? And then I think some of the rest of it is just work around, like I said, what is a harm? And I think understand how we're reproducing a particular thing. I mean, it's the second series, the Central Park Five, where I look a lot at the racist language used in the daily news. And sometimes I'm at odds with that work because I'm wondering if it's enough to pull something out, right? If something's recuperative, if you're bringing it up to show it, like what is it going to lead to? What is the change? I think one of the reasons the Michael Brown work is so successful is that it fixes something in a way, right? It's not, I didn't just pull out this thing to say, look at what the paper did and just leave it for you to look at. There is some attempt at a particular type of repair and care there that I feel like is important to that work. So I don't think that it's always very clear if you're doing something restorative, but I do think it's easier sometimes to see the harms. It means that you have to center the victim in a way.
Kirsten, I saw you unmuted.
One of the things I study are the historical implications of empathy and empathy as a social emotion with regard to especially images of torture and lynching. And what I found is that looking at an image of a lynching is like looking at a landscape. And, this is an observation that W.J.T. Mitchell makes in his anthology, Landscape and Power, that you don't know what people are seeing when they're looking at a landscape, but it's kind of generally agreed upon that they're seeing the nation and they're situating themselves in that space. Well, in looking at images of lynching, the pretense, the guise, the veil is that of empathy. We assume today that people approach these images and have a kind of a common empathetic reaction. And a lot of times empathy allows them to imagine that they've done the hard work in kind of recuperating these images for the heart and not the fist. But there are people who feel pleasure still in looking at it.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so the thing I study historically are the kind of phases of these images, first taken as part of extrajudicial killings, ritual murders, trophies, and then used by activists like Ida B. Wells and others to turn the camera around and say that the crime wasn't the victims, the crime belongs to the people on the ground, right? And then we move into this other phase where you have exhibitions like Without Sanctuary that tries to turn these images into memorials, so from trophy to indictment to memorial. And none of this works. And it's why I appreciated Christina bringing up, especially the Soil Collection Project, where you remove the body, you remove Black people from the crime of the state. And so, and this takes me to LaTanya's ongoing interest in the museum space. Even if you see a portrait of, or a self-portrait of a Black person in a museum, the subtext is always that potential for violence. And given the context of museums, and I worked in museum education for 4 years and got myself out of there because I saw that I could do nothing to change that space.
Mm-hmm.
Museums are, and the aesthetic experience are integrally intertwined with state-sanctioned violence. Immanuel Kant, as he was lecturing on aesthetics, was also lecturing on race. They are twinned in the same minds.
I say three small things. One, absolutely. The first is, right, we have to account for the pleasure that white people and others get from the perpetuation of violence. And I think until we account for that pleasure, we misapprehend some of the things that are at stake. The second thing is an example. Years ago, I went to the Nazi Documentation Center in Erlangen, Nuremberg, Germany. And as I've said before, by the time I left the Nazi Documentation Center, seeing the films, the Nazi fairground, and all of the collections, I became completely convinced that that documentation center was not doing the work that the people who made the installations thought that it was doing, that indeed it was producing people who would identify with Nazis, and that it would reproduce the very thing that it explicitly thought that it was not producing, because they did not account for that pleasure of identification. Right?
Yeah.
And then the third thing, which now can I remember, was I was thinking, no, I can't remember the third thing. Pleasure, Nazi Documentation Center. Yeah, I'll come back to the third thing if I can remember it. I can't read my own scribble.
I had a couple things too. One thing that I'm thinking about, and I think that Christina, you and I talked about this before with regard to JI and the soil. There's a photo booth there.
Absolutely.
Take a picture of yourself, and when I went through, when you get to the end and I see the photo booth, I saw like these white kids like all kind of joyously taking pictures in the photo booth with this soil as a backdrop. And that is something that really kind of haunted me, because I'm sitting here thinking lynching photos contain, white children joyously partaking with their family members and friends in this murder as well. And now in this space that is supposed to be honoring and supposed to be serving as some sort of justice for lynching victims, you have a photo booth where these white kids are joyously taking photos of themselves with a backdrop of lynching soil. And so that really tripped me out. And
William, can I just add one little thing to that too?
Yeah,
Do you mind? Sure. And that is, when you stand in front of the Legacy Museum, there's a lynching that plays out colorized over your head in 3 parts. And so if you have your photograph taken in front of the museum, right, there's also the scenes in the courtroom, contemporary, but the lynching of Thomas Shipp is colorized and in 3 scenes above your head. You are a Black person, you go to that museum, you stand in front of it, you get your picture taken, you might be taking your picture. If you don't crop it right, that's in there and that's circulating again. And so what is that doing? Sorry.
Absolutely true, and that part, I'd just forgotten that actually until you said it. And the other thing I wanted to touch on too is when we were thinking about Mamie Till coming up. For years we've had people saying like people need to see it, they need to see it, they need to see it. Or when these images of Black death and brutality are circulating and violence. People say you need to see it to make change, and that's their belief, but it's the belief that the person who was killed or brutalized has to be witnessed in this way, and it strips people of their autonomy again in favor of people's self-interest. And that can be something that's even self-promotional. There's people out here building their careers off of sharing viral videos and viral images of Black people being killed. There's people out here getting legal work because they can share this image and share this brutality against Black people in a way to promote themselves. So you know, when people are bringing up Mamie Till and they're saying Mamie Till, you know, Mamie Till, that was a lifetime ago, and that was in a different country, at a completely different country compared to what the country is now. I mean, and a completely different time and a completely different setting with different technology. And so also, you're not Mamie Till. Like, you're not Mamie Till. Mamie Till was Emmett Till's mother.
That's
and
right.
you're not a family member and you don't even have that relationship. Who are you to say that you have the right to choose how somebody's body is seen? You can't even take a picture of the casket in the Smithsonian, of Emmett Till's casket. You can't take a picture when you go in there. And so, you know, the closest thing we have is family members. And even that, you know, which we don't talk about, even that's not guaranteed, because we don't know people's relationship to that family member. You know, I'm not going to say that everybody in my family knows what I would want to happen with my body if I was killed by a police officer, or if I'm deceased. So, you know, it's very, very limited. And what's best, I think, for us to really do here is just be considerate about, we don't know, and we can't assume what people's desires were for their bodies after they are taken through an act of violence, or if they even want that to be seen at all.
And can I add to that? It's about allowing them the integrity of their experiences, allowing them the integrity of their bodily experiences. And I saw in one of the comments a definition of empathy. What I look at is the historical definition of it, the historical usage of it, the deployment of it, specifically by white abolitionists and their use of the Wedgwood medallion, the kneeling Black man, the kneeling Black woman, am I not a man and a brother? And it is, I describe it as the appropriation of embodiment, where you are asked to empathize with that person who is not you because of race or gender or you know, other imagined differences, and you're asked to inhabit their space, and you cannot do that. You have to allow the victims, these historical figures, your relatives, children, the integrity of their bodily experiences. And empathy is a product of early capitalism. It was a way to have us invest in things and people who are not us. And it was a way to appropriate other people's embodied experiences.
You know, one of the things I said yesterday in my talk was, you know, instead of recirculating those images of brutalized Black people, you know, a project that white people should take on is to identify those white people who are in those photographs. Kimberly Juanita Brown said something in a talk years ago about, you know, those white people are still alive, many of them, and they are. And that should be the project, to track them down, because people know that they're, you know, white people have been very quiet about their aunts, cousins, uncles, sisters, brothers, grandmothers who are in those photographs. People know who they are. The project should be to track those people down, those mementos that people have, that, you know, they pass down to their children, they keep them quietly. That should be the project. And that should be the project, to link that violence to the current self-possession and class possession, etc., that those people live in and enjoy, and then go into a museum for the education by seeing a lynched person. The project should be a different project. Those images aren't ours. That's not our brutal imagination that we are then forced to inhabit again. This is the final thing I'll say. There's a beautiful talk between Ruha Benjamin and Dorothy Roberts, where Ruha Benjamin is talking about, you know, about algorithms. And she says, you know, we have to think not just about output, but input, sort of what what ideas, what ethics are going into this programming. And she says, we are forced to live in a very narrow set of imaginations. And the imagination is a terrain of struggle. And we would really do well to I think, sit with that and to refuse to inhabit that brutal terrain and to keep reproducing it.
I wanted to jump on and say, Christina, you make me think of the Kerry James Marshall work, Heirlooms and Accessories, where he whites out, it's a scene of a lynching that I think was supposed to be a 3-person, turned it into a 2, and kind of whited out the lynching. I think you maybe can kind of see it a little bit at an angle, but he zooms in on the faces of 3 white participants and puts them inside of a chain, whatever, chain necklace,
like a cameo,
like exactly. The reason he used the word heirlooms, if I remember correctly from this interview, is that he saw it as something that you pass down, that should be passed down, right? Kind of identifying these white. I also wanted to think about refusal. Kwasi talks a lot about not even allowing space to ingest these images. And I also just kind of wonder what's lost as artists when we obsess and use our time that way, creatively, what potential for when we're mining the art, these particular images, right? What other ways can we honor and remember and do work around our ancestors that doesn't draw on this history, right? And so that's the question for me, I think, artistically, is, what am I bringing forth, right? And if, I think it's probably in some ways maybe even similar if you think about creating an altar, right? And what it means to kind of care and tend to in the real time. And so, I think there's a lot lost in obsession with death imagery, with lynching photography, with harms, and that unless there can be some way of bringing that forth and transforming it into something liberatory, then it shouldn't be brought up.
Thank you. I often think that these institutions, the museum, it likes those kind of images in a way. It likes these certain kind of extreme forms of the spectacle killings, that spectacle anti-Blackness. It requires it. I would say it requires it because that allows the attention to be kind of like, well, see, that's what racism is. Racism only looks like this. Racism only looks like this certain kind of theatrical destruction of Black bodies. These hooded white people, we don't get to see their faces because they got hoods on. That's what anti-Blackness is. It's when it's the KKK, that kind of thing. When in reality, yes, that is definitely a form of what anti-Blackness is in this world. And yet anti-Blackness is very complex and happens in so many forms. And I would say that's only like maybe 2% of it or something. It's happening all of the time. And that's why it's insane to me what the museum project is, for the most part, is an anti-Blackness project. That's what it is in the first place. They don't need to have those pictures. I made this kind of comment on Twitter a few weeks ago, but it was like, you don't need those. All you need to do is put a room up of mirrors, and then they could just go in there and look at themselves. Because they are the ones who perpetrate anti-Blackness all the time. That's the racism right there. It's them. They don't need those pictures, but they do, in terms of what the project is of the museum. They want to kind of, I think of it as a sleight of hand kind of thing, the smoke and mirrors. It's to go, this is what it is, and then continue to do the same violence that they're doing all of the time. They're doing to communities where they are situated. The disavowal of the people right in the place, the disavowal of the people that work there, the fact that Black people are typically in the lowest positions in these places. I can talk about all of that, but it's to say, because it allows the project of whiteness to just continue to reproduce. I think the museum is just really an extension, you know, it's that project of an arm of the state. It's an arm of white supremacy. It is the treasure trove of white supremacy and capitalism. And yeah, and so those kinds of expressions, I feel that the museum requires it. It needs that. And that's why so many people will fight to have it, because they want to keep this system going. They want to perpetrate it and, you know, keep it going on forever. And then these other things get thrown on where it's like, well, are you censoring artists? You know, because that is the value. If you're in this art world, is about censorship, and freedom of expression is the value. And so probably the worst thing you could do in that kind of paradigm is to censor someone. That becomes the whole discussion. And there is no focus on, really, like I was saying, with that expression that Hartman has that I think is just perfect, the brutal asymmetry of power. And really that plays out in these institutions. It plays out in a museum. That's what the museum is. That's why it's structured the way it is. Yeah, so care is not central for the most part in these places, because of just what the system is. So if people aren't centering kind of a care focus, as you all have been talking about here, what we do is we're just reproducing it. And so many of us, and I would say, you know, who work in, I call these white museums because they're white led and white centered. Those of us who are Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, working in white systems, many of us perform for that system, and we go along with that system because of that asymmetry of power. And so many people, unfortunately, the project of inclusion, I think, has really warped a lot of thinking. It's a lot of token inclusion, and what we do is we end up harming ourselves. And so, Christina, in your book, what I loved in that your book, in the wake, when you talk about that with what happens in the academy, is so many Black scholars get wrapped up in a way that do things that end up, that what the system is of the academy is one that requires, it's pushing on Black folks to do things that actually are against who they are and their own health. And actually that's the same stuff that's going on in museums.
I'd like to address one of the comments from an attendee. How do we align the discussion with those who believe that the imagery of brutalized civil rights protesters in Alabama and throughout the South on the nightly news in the 60s led to the transformational policy, such as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act? And this discussion does align with that. One of the functions of empathy is that it allows for the limited goals of civil rights and human rights. Our goal is never to free everyone or to allow people to know that they are free. The goals of civil rights movements have historically been limited. For example, the National Anti-Slavery Society in upstate New York was composed of white women. They would not allow Black women to join because while they felt that enslavement was wrong, they didn't want Black women to think that they were social equals. And so those images produced in the 50s and 60s certainly galvanized things, but always towards limited goals. We have never been fully enfranchised. In fact, it's Calvin Warren who says that the American dream is realized through Black suffering. It is the humiliated, incarcerated, mutilated, and terrorized Black body that serves as the vestibule for the democracy to come. And so those images, these constant images of suffering, actually portend the promise of democracy. And they allow us very limited movement in human rights.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten, for clarifying that important point that so many of us, I would say myself included, have not been aware of for a long time. And that's what is different about the project of, you know, the decolonization, what that project is asking for, or more of an abolitionist kind of, and I mean abolitionist in a certain way, not what you were just referring to, but in a way that many of some of our contemporary thinkers are taught what they're calling for, an abolitionist model. We are going to keep this conversation going, you know, in the week to come, but we do have to wrap up for today. I want to thank all of these just brilliant, great hearts for being here with me today. This is actually a dream come true for me. You don't even know, like it is amazing to be in conversation with all of these brilliant Black folks. Thank you for real. You know, like I said, working in these white museum spaces, it's rough, y'all. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you.
I want to also, I'm sorry. I want to also thank Aimee Meredith Cox for being on here earlier with us and helping us stay grounded in our bodies and, you know, about what we're doing, because this work is rough and it's hard, and it's important to keep our minds clear, and it is often so hard to do so. I want to, of course, you know, Miss Samaria Rice was not on the call today, but she was with us yesterday. And I just want to, you know, she's with us every day, I think, throughout this teaching. And, you know, I think it's been so important to reflect on what she was saying just yesterday and what she has been saying all along. So I would want to give a shout out to her right now. Of course, Kijo, thank you for, you know, joining me. And Kijo and I are going to keep doing this. She's signed up for the whole thing, so she's not going anywhere. Also, of course, Patty and Rachel for being our ASL interpreters today. Thank you so much. And our production team, I want to give a quick shout out to Taya Spittle, Lauren Leving, Melissa Kansky, Jennifer Cox, and Corey Dakin for helping me make this thing happen. I do want to say that, so after our session today, what you will receive, you'll get an email from Eventbrite to register for the closed workshop. This is titled Beholding Ourselves, and it's going to happen on Sunday, December 6th from 2:30 to 4 o'clock. So this session is a reflection, and it's open only to Black identifying persons who attended this December 4th roundtable. So Kijo Lee is going to lead a guided discussion through art and kind of thinking about what it is to live through the onslaught of anti-Black violence. So everyone who is here who identifies as Black is welcome to be part of that session on Sunday. And we do ask that you respect that this is open only for Black identifying persons. The next roundtable, we're going to kind of continue this discussion, but it's going to branch out into it's called Developing a Practice of Collective Care, and it happens on December 11th. That's next Friday, and it is also at 2:30 to 4 o'clock. And our panelists then will be Sheila P. Bright, Amanda D. King, Dr. Kelly Morgan, Dr. Izetta Mobley, Teresa Rayford, and Kijo will be joining me as co-moderator. And yes, thank you. And, you know, peace to everybody. Thank you. This was really beautiful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.